Welcome to today's meeting of the Children and Families Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I would like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live via the County Council's website and will also be available for viewing after the meeting. Can I ask you all to ensure that your mobile phones are switched to silent? Can you please switch your microphone on when speaking and then turn it off when you have finished? The main culprit for that is going to be me, forgetting to do that. I have received apologies from Mrs. Fryer, and Mr. Licorice is substituting for her. And I've also got apologies from Mr. Kaufman, and Mr. Bill is substituting for him. Right, Agenda 1. Minutes of meeting held on the 3rd of September. I have got one alteration on those minutes, ascertaining to page 9, big page 9, and it states on the last paragraph, he also commented on the success of the Pride in Practice event in Melton. It should have read Social Work Conference in Melton. Thank you. I propose that the minutes of the meeting held on the 3rd of September, after that has been altered, are as read, and I will confirm and sign. Is everybody in agreement? Thank you. I have no questions that have been received, and I have no questions from any members. I have not been notified of any other urgent items. And does any member have any interest that they wish to declare in respect of the items on the agenda? Do members have any declarations of a party whip? No? And there's no petitions to be presented this evening. The first item on today's agenda is Adverse Childhood Experiences. We will receive a presentation of this from Jane Moore, Director of Children's and Family Services, and welcome Ellie Lowe, the Service Manager. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. We wanted to share with you some work or an overview, really, of adverse childhood experiences and in particular the impact they have on children and as children later on in life as adults. So my colleague Ellie Lowe is here. She's one of the service managers in our Children and Family Wellbeing Service, and she's been leading on some of this work across the department and partnership. So she's going to do a presentation that will give us an overview of adverse childhood experiences, but also some of the work that's taking place in the department, and then we're going to end with a short video for you. So I'll hand you over to Ellie. Thank you.
Thank you. This is going to be quite a short presentation, really just to give you some background to the subject of adverse childhood experiences. This is subject, it's also known as ACEs, so you'll often hear people refer to ACEs. So just to begin, to tell you a little bit about what ACEs are. So these are stressful and frequently occurring events that children may experience in their lifetime. And to give you some examples of those types of events, things like domestic abuse and conflict, so households where there might be a great deal of argument between family members, particularly between parents, where there's parental alcohol and substance abuse. There may be violence inside the home, there may also be violence in the community. And all of these have an implication on children's emotional health and well-being. Just to expand on that slightly, we think a little bit about the science of ACEs. So when children are fairly frequently in contact with these kinds of adverse experiences, the body produces a toxic stress reaction. And this can actually alter how our DNA functions, and it's something that can pass down from generation to generation. So when children are experiencing these really difficult events in their childhood, unfortunately this can carry on through the generations. So one of the things that toxic stress does is overdevelops the life-preserving response. So that part of our brain the fight or flight reaction. It means that that child is often prepared and ready for an adverse event, so they're rarely at rest, and their body and their brain doesn't really get the time and opportunity to grow and develop, whereas the child in a more settled environment would have those opportunities. So there's been a huge amount of research on ACEs, and this began in the late 90s in the US. So a fairly commonly quoted researcher, Folletti, has carried on these longitudinal studies in the United States since the late 90s, but these have been replicated around the world, including in the UK, and particularly in Scotland and in Wales there have been some fairly notable studies of the impact of ACEs on children and adults. One of the things that we do know, and with some certainty, is there's a really significant evidence base between the link of children experiencing childhood adversity and poor health outcomes as adults. And some of the statistics, which I'll share with you in a moment, are really quite shocking and alarming. So research also tells us that ACEs are actually very common, and in general studies, around 64% of adults will have experienced one or more ACE in their childhood. There is also a dose response. So the more ACEs a child experiences, the more that they're at risk of their lifespan being shortened. So children who've experienced 6 or more can potentially see their lifespan shortened by 20 years. The kinds of difficulties that adults might experience are things like chronic disease, such as cancers, heart disease, mental illness. They're more likely to experience substance misuse and more likely to be found in the prison population. So for those adults who've experienced 4 or more ACEs, they're 5 times more likely than the general population to use illicit drugs. They're 7 times more likely to be addicted to alcohol, 7 times more likely to be violent, and more than 12 times more likely to commit or attempt suicide. They're also 11 times more likely to be found in the prison population. Based on estimates of Leicestershire's population, we could predict that 93,942 over 18s in the county will have experienced 4 or more ACEs. It's not all bad. There are things that we can do around prevention. So we know that when we intervene early with children, glasses off, I'm at that stage of middle age. So binge drinking can be reduced by 15%. Unintended teenage pregnancy with the right intervention reduced by 38%. There are things we can do to build resilience in children and families. So whilst they might still experience some difficulties, having a trusted adult that they can go to and talk to is proven to be one of the factors that supports resilience in children. So that might be a youth worker, a social worker, a teacher. These are all things that can be done to help reduce the impact of ACEs. So again, the example here, incarceration during an adult's lifetime can be reduced by 53% with the right interventions. I'm just going to come back to this because we're having a small technology problem, so Gemma will assist with this, but just to give you a little bit of information about what we've been doing in Leicestershire. So within my own service, Children and Family Wellbeing, we've had a renewed focus on our 1001 critical days. These are the first 1001 days of a baby's life, which are really, really important in baby brain development. So we've been working with families to help them understand the importance of those 1001 critical days. We're working also to improve our approach to parenting, so bringing in more evidence-based practice with an organisation called Triple P, and studies have shown that this has a significant impact in reducing parental conflict and disharmony in households. Through the Children and Families Partnership, we've been doing some multi-agency working. So far this year, we've had a very successful conference with our partners. We recently held a workshop with the board, and we have a plan in place with some actions to take this further across the partnership. We're just going to step back now to it's a very short animation, just a few minutes, but I think helps to really illustrate the impact of ACEs. Thank you.
My parents don't understand. All the drinking and fighting means I'm scared. I'd like a cuddle, perhaps a bedtime story, but mostly I'd like them to stop shouting at me. And sometimes they hit me. Feeling scared every day and not feeling loved or wanted will change me for the rest of my life. Later, I'll have problems at school, problems with alcohol, and I'll get in trouble with the police. What's happening to me right now means I'm more likely to have serious health problems in middle age and die sooner than I should. Doctors say my life is full of adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. But in my world, this means I see my dad hitting my mum. Dad's got a drinking problem, and mum's always crying, even with the tablets. I am always being shouted at and hit. After the booze and fags, there's not a lot of money for toys or clothes, or even food. I'm getting used to being scared all the time. Now I'm just angry. Doctors say things are changing inside me. My brain isn't learning how to control my feelings properly. My body can't relax like those kids who don't have ACEs, so my body won't be able to repair itself properly when I get older, making it more likely I'll get cancer or heart disease as an adult. It hurts when my parents hit me, but the real damage is hidden, and that damage will be with me for life.
I drink and smoke. They say I'm out of control, but I'm not. It's just my way of coping with my ACEs. I've been in plenty of fights, but what's wrong with that? Kids' punches don't hurt half as much as when my dad hits me. I beat up a kid last week at school because he looked at me weird. Who cares? I ended up with more time out of school. Learning's not for me anyway, and the teachers don't care any more than my parents. I don't like the way anyone looks at me except my girl. She's 16 and pregnant. Just like my mum was with me.
So this is where I've ended up. I've got diabetes and cancer's probably on the way. I know these kill you, but I couldn't do without them. I've never had a proper job and I've spent time inside. I hate my kids. I hate their mum too, until she left, so my kids have grown up with ACEs. And now my daughter had her first kid. She's 16. The course of my life was set in the wrong direction a long time ago. I know where I'm heading, and sadly I know where my kids are heading too. This doesn't have to happen. A little help in childhood makes a big difference to where life takes you. When I was a baby, the nurses noticed that my mum wasn't coping and helped her and explained how important my childhood is to the rest of my life. So, with a bit of help, she coped. The police came round after next door complained about the noise from Mum and Dad fighting. They asked how I was feeling. I told them I was scared all the time. Mum and Dad got help. The shouting got better and the hitting stopped. I even got some bedtime stories. I still had problems at school, but the teacher asked me about what was happening at home. I got help controlling my feelings. It wasn't a lot, but it was enough. I'm now married with 2 children, and I've got a job, most of the time. I haven't repeated the same problems with my kids. We got help when being a parent got too much. Our children are ACE-free, and that means their kids stand a good chance of growing up ACE-free as well. Almost half the people in England and Wales experienced one ACE as a child, and 1 in 10 of us suffered 4 or more ACEs. If we stop ACEs, millions of children would not become smokers or binge drinkers, and levels of violence in adults would be cut in half. Fewer ACEs in childhood also means fewer adults developing diseases like cancer, heart disease and diabetes in middle age. We all need to be ACE aware. Are you? Doctors, police, nurses, teachers, firefighters and most importantly parents. The more you know about ACEs, the more you can help stop children growing up with ACEs in their lives. And for those of you who have already suffered ACEs, the more you know, the more you can help yourself and others who have suffered ACEs cope.
I would just like to say that I found that clip enthralling to watch, really. Far better than listening to you talking, and far better than reading words. And I found it very good. Is it available to the members? Could it be?
Yes, it was produced by Public Health, and it's available via YouTube. Which,
Okay.
if you just, we could send around a link.
Yeah. Okay. So it's not protected or anything like
No.
that. We can just. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Chair. As you will, members will be aware, the department was subject to the full ILACS inspection back in September. So I thought before we gave you the overview of our current programme, it would be useful for you to hear a little bit more detail about the outcome of our most recent inspection. So members will be aware that the last time we were inspected was back in November 2016, when Ofsted told us that we required improvement to be good across all areas of the department. They came back in November 2018 to look at our front door and identified that we had made significant improvement. And in September this year, we were notified that we would be subject to a full inspection of our services for children who are worked with through our early help services and our social care services. So there are 4 judgment areas that Ofsted were looking at. They were looking at the impact of leaders on social work practice with children and families. And for that, Ofsted have said that we are now good. They were looking at the experiences and progress of children who need help and protection. And for that area, Ofsted have now told us we remain requiring improvement to be good. For the third area is the experiences and progress of children in care and care leavers, and Ofsted have told us that we are now good in that area. And then the last area was overall effectiveness, and Ofsted have told us that we still require improvement to be good in that area. So we've moved up in 2 areas of the inspection from requires improvement, but we still, as I said, require improvement to be good across 2 of the other areas. Just in terms of brief summary, really, Ofsted were really clear that there had been progress made across all areas of children's services since the 2016 inspection. And whilst services for children in care were good and leadership was good, overall, what they said was that children were not experiencing consistently good practice enough across all services, and that the extent of the changes that needed to be made still meant that our overall judgment was required improvement. but actually really importantly, they were very clear that there was significant improvement across all areas from the 2016 inspection. And actually in some areas they were identifying that some of the services that we delivered were very good, very strong, and they could see some real positive impact for children. So just in terms of pulling out some of the key points that Ofsted raised with us, in terms of our strengths, they were very clear about the commitment in investment by politicians and corporate leaders, together with the effective work by staff and senior managers, that's meant that the responses to the needs of children and families have improved in many areas. They also could see that most children in care were settled in good homes and with their needs well met, and for that reason they're making good progress in our care. They noted that most of our care leavers live in suitable accommodation. The majority are participating in education, training and employment. They also identified that we are making a far more timely and effective response to children when they first need help and protection, and that includes our out-of-hours service, which they were very praising of, our response to children who are at risk of sexual exploitation, children who go missing, and those children who are experiencing domestic abuse. And they were very clear about the strength of the services that we were delivering to meet those children's needs. They told us that our quality of assessments have improved and that we're now more clearly identifying children's needs. And they also commented very positively on our services around fostering and adoption. And for those reasons and those strengths, they were saying that children in Leicestershire are experiencing better outcomes. Some of the key issues that they identified for us were across all of the areas in the department, and as a result of that, there are some recommendations that Ofsted have made for us. So they talked about the fact that the quality of our social work practice is still too variable, and that's particularly for those children who need help and protection. So those children that we have on a child in need plan or a child protection plan, they were particularly saying there was some variability, although the variability was across all of our services. They've said that we need to improve some of our core areas of social work practice, and also our management oversight still need to be improved. And that they were explicit around our need to be more specific around timescales within our plans for children with for children and families. They pointed that the permanence planning for our children whose route is not adoption needs to improve and be stronger, and that they wanted to see a more high quality supervision of our social workers that enabled the work to be moving at greater pace. So they've set out 6 recommendations in the report. We had 17 in our last inspection, and they cover the areas I've just identified around areas that we need to improve on. So Ofsted require us to submit an action plan to them by the 10th of February that addresses the areas for improvement that they've set out. As you'll hear from the update from Sharon, we already have our Road to Excellence and our continuous improvement plan, and actually the areas that we will report on that we still require work on are the areas that Ofsted told us that we weren't doing as well on. So they said that we know ourselves well as leaders, we know our strengths and we know our areas for improvement, and I think that's mirrored in the report that Sharon will give in a moment. We will be bringing a full report to this committee in January, where we'll go over in far more detail about what Ofsted were telling us, but also we'll present to you our action plan for dealing with the issues that Ofsted raised. Thank you.
I am going to ask if anybody would like to really not ask questions on this unless it's to clarify, and probably to make some comments on the report. So is there anybody that would like to say something?
I've just been looking through the Ofsted report, which is quite interesting reading. I think you have been a little bit hard done by, to be honest. I think it could have come out a bit better than this, but just ask a few questions. paragraph 50 on the last page of the report, it says, while significant improvement has been achieved in a wide range of service areas, actions to address some deficits have not had sufficient impact. So while leaders have initiated campaigns to improve the quality of plans and the impact of frontline management supervision, these have not led to consistent or sustained improvements in frontline practice. Do you recognise that comment? Could you like to respond?
Yeah, I think Sharon will pick some of this up in the report that she gives, but what they were saying within that paragraph is that the department has made significant improvements and they can see the work that we've done. They also know that we have started to take some actions around the quality of supervisions, plans, and all of the other areas. And what Ofsted were telling us is that they couldn't see the impact of that sufficiently enough to enable us to get to good. So essentially, we recognised that comment from them, and they were quite clear throughout the inspection around what that meant. So I think some of the things that Sharon will pick up in the overview of the continuous improvement plan almost brings some of that to light around where we know we are and where we are with the remaining actions.
So do you think you're in a better position than you were 3 years ago when you had 17 things to improve? You've now got 6, or is it that these are the more difficult ones to deal with?
Yes, we're in a far better position than we were 3 years ago. And I guess the other point that we are really clear about is when we came out of the 2016 inspection, we put together a 4-year plan of improvement, and we're in year 3 of that plan. So the remaining year of that plan, which will cover, there are a number of areas that we need to work on. I think the changes that have been made within the department that have got us to where we are now have taken significant effort and work. So I think this does reflect where we're at in terms of our developmental journey, and it certainly is very clear about the kind of next bit of work that we need to do to get us to good overall.
Question is, so the report didn't come as that much of a surprise to you, right?
No, I think one of the things that we were really pleased about during the inspection is that, and Ofsted reflected back to us, is that things weren't being raised that we weren't aware of. So Ofsted recognised that as leaders and as managers across the department, we know ourselves well. Actually, what's come through in the report is a balanced overview of the areas where we are strong, areas where we're doing really well, but also where we know that we need to improve.
Mr. Old, have you got anything to add to that?
Thank you, Chair. In 2016, when I attended the debriefing session, I made 6 pages of notes. This time, I made 1 page. When I was interviewed before the inspection took place by the lead inspector, she only asked 3 questions in a 45-minute telephone conversation. And I attended the briefing meetings in between as the Ofsted progressed, and also the final one. In one sense, given that I read other local authorities' reports, I am puzzled by the fact that every other report that I've read, which has had 2 of the 3 areas labelled good, usually gets good overall, which is the 4th area. But I think the comments that have been made in the Ofsted report are fair. I think they're balanced. They tell us where we are in year 3 of the 4-year plan, and I think they show great credit to the officers who've led the recovery plan since 2016.
Thank you, Chair. I know how much work has been put in by the lead member and the officers and the department. And I do understand how much it must have been a disappointment. But I think we have to hold on to the fact that it's far, far better than it was 3 years down the line. In the past. And we are only in the 3rd year. And we've only got 2 ambers. So that leads me very nicely on to Sharon. to give us a progress report on the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll change my name to Gemma if you want.
Drop the computer, that'll help.
Okay, so the report that members have before you is a report that was completed prior to our Ofsted outcome, and focuses very much on the background of our continuous improvement journey as part of our Road to Excellence. As Jane said, is a 4-year plan, and we're in year 3 of that. Previously, I've reported on the 17 recommendations, and as members have asked over the last couple of times that I've been to overview and scrutiny, I've not provided the report on those areas that we agreed were green and we've signed off, but rather focused on the areas that we are still working on. So the 2 key areas that remain from the 17 recommendations are the area of ensuring management oversight of practice fully complies with the supervision policy requirement and supports effective case progression and case decision making, and what was recommendation 6 of the 17, which is around consistency in social work assessments, around sufficiency in depth, good quality chronologies, and reflecting the needs of children. Further down in the report, in paragraph 14, I've summarised for you some of the key activity that has been taking place in the period under review, and also some key activity that is planned to take place. And as I hope you'll see, those are really things that are helping us to embed our supervision policy. So we refreshed and revised our supervision policy that was relaunched in January of this year. We have done a lot of monitoring about the frequency of supervision to ensure that staff receive that supervision, and we've been moving more recently to really get into the depth around the quality of that supervision and how reflective that supervision is, to both ensure robust management oversight, but importantly that the cases and plans for children are being driven. They are actually the things that Ofsted identified are still the key issues that we need to be working on. So as Jane outlined, Ofsted were really clear that we know ourselves well. The things that we need to work on are the things that we are working on and the things that we have a plan in place to address. Further case file audits have been completed. What I can report back to you is that our completion rates for assessments within 45 days has continued to increase and improve, and our more recent case file audits have identified that the quality of our assessments is improving, and that was actually borne out by Ofsted's comments about that work and our improvement in identifying and assessing a child's needs. What we need to continue to work at are some of the surrounding issues around making sure chronologies are updated, and we need to make sure that our plans are smart plans and actually are really clearly driving the plan that we, the work that we've assessed that child to require. What we've not been as good at and what we need to do more of is making sure that our actions have got clear timescales attached to them. We have a campaign on planning that's due to started this week. That was actually in progress before Ofsted came, and Ofsted talked to us about the success of our assessment campaign that's just finished, and they could see that by concentrating on a key area, we were really driving the depths of practice. The dilemma that they talked to us about was very much around the pace to make sure that whilst they see that we've got to drive the depth in each of these areas, we need also to be concentrating and driving at pace, all of them. So the supervision and the planning is very much part of our campaign that started now. Attached for you in Appendix A are some of the more detailed information that I provide for you around those 2 recommendations, the targets, the performance targets, the progress completed to date or by September 19, and then the further action that's in progress and the lead officer that's driving those key areas. I have said before, but will say again, that although individual officers take responsibility for certain parts of this plan, the plan is overseen by the senior management team. I chair that meeting on a weekly basis, and a monthly meeting takes place with the wider management team to update and drive the continuous improvement plan.
Mr Welsh.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's really good that we're recognising the same areas that Ofsted are looking at, but just one sort of speculative comment really on the RAG progress on both of these, the red, amber, green progress. We've said amber, so it raises the question, are we being too soft on ourselves? And in light of what just happened, should they have been red? And I sort of throw in that in there just as the way we approach what will be a new forthcoming improvement plan.
Yeah, that's a fair comment. The reason that we have had these 2 actions as amber is that this is a 4-year plan, that we needed to make some really fundamental changes and actions to address the remaining of the 17 recommendations. And we set ourselves a clear timescale to make changes that were timely where we could make them timely, but were actually done in a way that would embed and change the culture and practice here longer term. So for that reason, we did give ourselves longer on these two areas.
Just to add to that as well, I think just to be clear, Ofsted weren't saying they couldn't see this at all. So they weren't saying that they could not, they couldn't see management oversight at all. What they were very clear with us was that in some places they were seeing it and it was outstanding, it was good, but it wasn't consistency. And I guess that's where the amber comes in. Is that if it was red, I think Ofsted would have been telling us that they could consistently not see some of the things that we said we were going to do. So I think I think amber reflects that we're well on our way to the journey of doing it, and Ofsted verified for us we can't consistently see you doing the areas that you've identified.
Being new to this panel, I'm having to play catch up, so please excuse if these questions are seemingly ignorant of previous facts. But when you look at pages 16 and 17, like for example, number 7, where the OCIAP addresses, and it gives you four aims, and then you look at point 14 that gives you some plans of action. When I read them, and as I say, coming to this committee new, I was left. My first thought was, shouldn't we be doing these? Wouldn't an organisation like ourselves be doing this anyway? So the question is it a case of we were doing this anyway, but we weren't doing it to a high enough frequency? Or there was something in the actual work streams that was wrong, that wasn't delivering these aims, that would have seemed quite fundamental in the first place?
Okay. Okay, I'll try and answer that. The Road to Excellence plan that highlights the 4 aims that you've referred to in paragraph 7, we made we were determined when we reviewed the outcome of Ofsted in 2016 that our plan shouldn't be simply Ofsted said point 1 recommendation and we're going to do A. What we would look at is what do we need to do to actually change the culture and make sure that we were embedding real change within the organisation. So the key aims, the key 4 areas are the title of areas under which we've got a lot of activity, and a lot of activity that's part of our continuous improvement plan and has been part of our continuous improvement plan since 2016. So you're right that the things in paragraph 14 are things that are fundamental things that we need to do to make sure that vulnerable children and young people in Leicestershire get a consistently good and our ambition outstanding service, and they are around planning and they are around supervision. So as Jane has said, it's not that we're not doing any of those things, and it's not that we haven't made significant progress and change to those areas that have been reported to this committee over the period. This is the next stage of key work that will really help us embed some of the things that are still outstanding.
Right, that seems to be it. Thank you very much on that one. So we'll go to Agenda 10, which is the overview of special educational needs and disability improvements. Paula Sumner, hello, Assistant Director for Education and Early Help, will present the report.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. So not Gemma this time.
No.
Okay.
I don't know where that came from.
So briefly, the purpose of the report is to provide members of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee with a summary really of the national and the local context relating to special educational needs and disabilities, but also to share with members of the committee some of the plans that we've got in place, similar to Sharon's, to continuously develop and improve services to support children and families who are living with special educational needs and disabilities. Just a bit of the background, in October 2019, Cabinet was advised of the progress of the High Needs Development Plan and authorised Jane as the Director of Children and Family Services to apply to the Secretary of State for approval of the transfer of up to around 0.5% of the schools block funding for to the high needs block. That's if it isn't agreed by Schools Forum. Consultation on that has taken place and ends tomorrow, and the Schools Forum will consider the findings of that. By way of some background then, as you will know, local authorities have got a number of statutory duties around special educational needs, primarily to identify and assess the special educational needs of children and young people for whom they're responsible. And the local authority is responsible for children or young people in the area as soon as they become aware that the child or young person may have special educational needs. Again, in 2014, there were some significant changes and reforms made to the SEND agenda. One or two of the key themes that people will be familiar with was the replacement of statements of special educational needs, replaced with educational health and care plans. We had a period of time by which to complete this, and in Leicestershire we did that within timescales, and that work was undertaken in 2017. Another significant change in those reforms was that EHCPs were extended to young people aged 25 to support them into transitioning into adulthood. some of the other significant changes highlighted in paragraph 14 was the local offer. Every council is now required to publish a detailed directory of services to support children and families with SEND. And I think amongst those there were a number of other significant reforms, but against this backdrop of significant change, it's fair to say that local authorities across the country have faced some challenges in responding to these reforms, particularly given the requirement to work with a broader range of children and young people, and again with the introduction of EHCPs. It's fair to say that Leicestershire performed particularly well in relation to the conversion of statements into EHCPs and generally in their timeliness in completing EHCPs. But as across the country, there's been some significant challenges on the system, with a significant increase in the requests for education and healthcare plans. And as you can see by the table in paragraph 18, we've increased by 52% in terms of the numbers of education and healthcare plans since the reforms were introduced. So in order to respond to these challenges and to build on some of that good performance, the department has developed a robust development plan, a continuous improvement plan similar to that in children's social care, and we've learned from their successes there. It was agreed by Cabinet in October, and there has been some significant progress made. The plan is overseen by a programme board and is chaired by myself, with regular reports to the departmental management team. There are 3 key areas of work within that plan. One of the big areas that people will be familiar and will start to be seeing in their local areas is the development and provision of additional places for children with special educational needs. The initial plan, sufficiency plan, proposed an additional 628 places. Some of those came into force from September this year, 143 places available, and 310 places will be available in September next year, and the places will come into play year on year. There's 2 further schemes have been added to the plan since. That will provide an additional 38 places, so that gives a 658 increase in places across the county. To supplement some of this provision, at its meeting in October 2019, Cabinet agreed to authorise the Director of Children and Family Services to, following the necessary consultation, look to seek expressions of interest from trusts to operate a new 50-place school for children with social, emotional, mental health needs on the vacant Oakfield site in Blaby, with hopefully opening in September next year. So all in all, the capital programme's 31 schemes, 11 of those have started to admit pupils from September 19, and a further 5 are expected by Easter of next year. There's a significant amount of work being undertaken around the commissioning of places and commissioning of services. The County Council has taken a whole systems approach to managing this increased demand on services. So there will be, for example, support to schools and other providers to help in improving in early intervention and special educational needs support in the classroom before an education and healthcare plan is required. So we'll be working with schools to build capacity and skills and knowledge and provide them with some tools to assist with that. The Leicestershire Parent Carer Forum are our recognised body of parents that we consult with, but that we do consult and work with, and a broader representative of parents, but they are the nationally recognised Parent Carer Forum. They continue to be very well engaged with the council and its partners, and are very well engaged in co-producing strategies, policies and key pieces of development within the local authority and with our partners. On page 26 of the report, we talk about the development of the inclusion service, which has brought together a number of services to support children who are struggling in mainstream education. So we've now got a new service in place, and it's already enabled an increase in the early identification of need and deployment of the right service at the right time for children. It's reducing unnecessary escalation to exclusion. We still have very low numbers of permanent exclusions in Leicestershire. And we're also providing support to mainstream schools to include children with social and emotional mental health concerns. But in some areas where schools lack the resources and skills to accommodate their needs, so the inclusion service are providing an integrated support offer to schools to help with that. And then if we just look at the resource implications on page 27, as you'll see by the report, there's a significant deficit forecast. So given the scale of this potential overspend and the cumulative deficit, a whole organisational focus will be maintained on the high needs development plan. The issues being faced in Leicestershire are mirrored elsewhere in the country, and as stated in the report, it's reported that around 90% of county councils are overspending in this area, with the total deficit exceeding at somewhere in the region of £120 million. The recovery plan is focused on ensuring we've got the sufficient availability of places for children in the right localities, as well as on improving practice and early intervention and early help to support schools and children earlier in the system. So just to conclude, Chair, that Leicestershire's responded well to the SEND reforms that were introduced in 2014, but have taken that step further and to support the high needs development plan and responding to the pressures on the budget. That plan is looking at not just the provision of places within the system, but also on improving practice both within the local authority and across the partnership. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Paula. Councillor Mr. Sheehan, please.
This statistic about there's been a 52% increase in ECHPs over the past 5 or 6 years, and it doesn't show any signs of levelling off. We've had 14% increase in the last year alone. Do we know where this is going, for a start? And then can we ask the question, do ECHPs, now we've had them for 5 or 6 years, genuinely lead to health and care needs being better met?
I think if we continue doing the same as we're doing now, then my feeling is that the requests would continue to increase. We've got a lot of diagnostic work going on to try and understand where that increase has come from, and there are a number of factors that have led to that. One is where potentially a child's needs hasn't been met within a school setting, and therefore their needs have escalated and have not been responded to appropriately. So that's when we talk about good sense support in schools, and we're looking to build capacity in schools to improve that offer so that children can have their needs met in mainstream school where appropriate, albeit sometimes with additional support. In terms of whether EHCPs are meeting the needs of children, It's difficult to respond to that on a holistic kind of generic approach. It depends on the quality of the education and healthcare plans, and we're doing a considerable amount of work to improve them. There's a lot more cross-working with social care in terms of the social care contribution to plans now, and that's improving, and with the contribution from health partners as well. So again, a journey of improvement, and where EHCPs are of good quality, they will meet the needs of the child.
But would you agree that it's the right question to ask at this time, given we've had 5 years' experience of this, and we ought to be getting an answer somewhere?
Jane?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely the right question to be asked at this time, and indeed there's a review now going on into looking at the reform. So I think in terms of timing, the question is right, because it's been in place now for 5 years. We have seen a significant increase in the number of children coming into the system since the SEND reforms back in 2014, and we know that there are significant pressures within the system as a result of increasing the numbers, and I guess as a department, our commitment is about getting it right for children and making sure that any system means that we can best meet children's needs. So we are pleased to see that there's a parliamentary review of the reforms in order to understand whether or not those reforms are doing what they were set out to do, and obviously we would welcome that. As Paula says, we've done a lot of work in the department looking at what we're delivering, what we ought to be delivering, how we ought to be doing things differently, so we know where we can improve and develop within the department. But some of this is about the wider SEND reforms and the impact this has had on both numbers coming through and also what local authorities are therefore able to deliver.
As somebody who used to try and negotiate around an EHCP to make sure that I was ticking all those boxes, I found it terribly difficult, very wordy, just very difficult, very obtuse, a lot of the things, and I had to put my own spin on it, which isn't really the idea, is it? Okay, so Mr. Walsh.
Thank you, Chair. The department suffered reputational damage when, on the 21st of October, the Leicester Mercury reported that the local government ombudsman had awarded nearly £5,000 to a family in Leicestershire over the way that it had dealt with the EHCP plan for them. And the report in the Mercury talks about the council delaying issuing an EHCP and also failing to provide school transport. My worry is that odd children are falling between the cracks. And anecdotally, I've received reports of a number of cases where problems have occurred. So my question is, this report talks of improvements. I want to be assured that these improvements will mean that such a similar Mercury report won't occur again, and that children won't fall between the cracks going forward.
Sorry, Jane.
Yeah, I think we would want to be in a position where we can reassure you that that isn't the case. I think some of the work that we've described within the paper around the changing way in which we're dealing with children sets out our intention and certainly ambition to make sure children don't fall through the gaps. So I think in particular the work we're doing around inclusion means that we are providing a very different, more proactive response to those children who are out of education. We don't want children to be out of education. We do want to be able to meet children's needs, and we want to be able to be creative and innovative in our responses to those children. So whilst I wouldn't want to say to you that those kind of issues won't be repeated, we know that there are parents and children who are struggling across Leicestershire. Our ambition is that we are moving our services around to ensure that we can respond where those children are out of education.
Mr. Parton.
I'm looking at number 11, personal budgets. Please would you be able to tell me more about it specifically? By having a say in the way this budget is used, a parental carer can control elements of their support. But then the last line, however, the local authority has a duty to oversee the appropriate use of these, it is working, of these financial resources and should put in place mechanisms to monitor it. So these are payments being made to the parents. How is this being policed to make sure that money is being spent for the purposes it was given?
Thank you, Chair. What we have within the service, within the Senate service, are payment cards that are provided to parents, and they have a list of providers that they can buy things like support in the home, short breaks, etc. for children, and so it's done through the council's payment system, so that all of the financial procedure rules are met by it being part of the council's financial system.
So you say it's a payment card rather than debiting money into their bank account?
In most cases, parents or carers of children with, who qualify for direct payments or personal budgets, they will have a payment card in most cases.
Okay, thank you for that. Can I go to paragraph 15, please, on page 23, where it states they must also take steps to ensure that parents and or young people are actively involved. What are the steps that you would take to ensure that would happen? Thank you.
Parents and carers are always involved, for example, in the development of an education and healthcare plan. I think you've just described some of your experiences of that. But also there are things around policy, practice, our communications, marketing, that the parents will be engaged in. So we co-produce things. So what will happen, what you'll start seeing next month, just as an example, is a Leicestershire Send newsletter, and it's the foreword is by me and the chair of the Parent Carer Forum, and it's very much a partnership document. So we will always make sure that we're co-producing things. Parents are obviously involved in the annual reviews of education and healthcare plans, but again a recognition that some of that can be improved, and we can have and one of the things that we're looking at within the Senate service now is improving our casework model, so it isn't felt, I think this is listening to parents and their feedback, as it can be very much like you're being processed through a system rather than having a relationship with your worker in the same way as you would, for example, with a social worker if they were accessing those services. So we're working with the Parent Carer Forum now on developing that new model of working, which will help to develop relationships with the service. That will also help with our with the perception of the service as well, and having a much more frequent and regular dialogue with parents and carers about children and the outcomes that they're achieving in school or other provision.
Thank you. Could I take you then to paragraph 26 on page 24? Uncertainty about the delivery of the 50-place social housing is, sorry, not social housing, I've forgotten where I was, social and emotional mental health free schools. Is that uncertainty about the build or when it will be ready, or?
That will be resolved now by if when we've talked about the Oakfield site, that will resolve those issues.
Okay, because you did say hopefully it'll be open next year.
Yes, September 2020, yeah.
We're currently consulting with schools on moving money between the blocks. The Dedicated Schools Grant is made up of 3 blocks. So there's the block that goes to fund our core schools budget. There is the block that funds our high needs block, which we've covered in this paper, that is significantly overspent and projecting increased overspend. And then there's our early years block. The proposal that the County Council is currently looking at is transferring money from the schools block into the high needs block. So as Paula set out in the paper, we are currently be consulting on that. So we've gone out to all schools to seek their views on the proposed transfer, and we'll be meeting with Schools Forum tomorrow. Early indications are that schools are not supportive of the transfer.
Thank you. And the last thing is resource implications, and really it's a question on a word here. At paragraph 42, the deficit of the high needs block is forecast to peak. Peak to me is the top. That means it'll go down. Whether it's an unfortunate word or whether that is what is going to happen. Have you got a crystal ball there?
That would be helpful in relation to the high needs block. The high needs plan that we've put together sets out the current trajectory of spend across the high needs budget, and as we've indicated within the paper, if we don't do anything, the trajectory of that overspend is not sustainable by any means. The plan that we've put together means that we aren't able to remove any overspend in the next few years. And as we said in paragraph 42, the forecast as we're doing the actions we're doing in the high needs plan means that the overspend will peak in 2021 at 13.5 million, and that's with us taking the actions that we're taking that we've set out in the paper. After 21-22, we then see the deficit starting to decrease, and we get to a position where we're spending within budget. But because of the breadth or the depth of the work that we need to do, that isn't something that we will be resolving quickly, hence our peak at 13 million overspend in 21-22. But yes, the plan then starts to recover.
Right, thank you very much for that one. And we'll now go on to item 11, which is the corporate parenting strategy. Sharon.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Yeah, the report in front of you is the purpose of the report on our draft corporate parenting strategy is to consult committee and enable to seek your views on our proposed revised corporate parenting strategy. So just as way of background, in paragraph 2 of the report, this outlines that the corporate parenting strategy is the framework for the role of local authorities and their relevant partners as defined under the Children Act 2004, and it's in the application of our corporate parenting principles as set out in the Children and Social Work Act 2017. So local authorities in England have to give regard to the statutory roles and responsibilities of the Director of Children's Services and the lead member for Children's Services. As way of background, Leicestershire County Council is currently the corporate parent for 610 children and young people who are in our care. And as corporate parents, we have a responsibility to make sure that we are doing everything possible to ensure that the children in our care are treated in a way and are cared for in a way that we would want for our own children. So Leicestershire has a strong corporate parenting ethos and are really clear that this is not just about us keeping children and young people safe, this is about us being ambitious and aspirational for the children that are in our care and those that leave our care as care leavers. Paragraph 7 sets out for the committee the 7 corporate parenting principles that were introduced by the Children and Social Work Act in 2017. And the draft corporate parenting strategy that's attached as Appendix A is our commitment and revised commitment as we've revised and reviewed the corporate parenting strategy to make sure that we inspire, support and enable our children in care and care leavers to be ambitious and be successful in their lives. Further information for you, many of you will have been part of this, is that we earlier this year you had a 5-member scrutiny panel which actually really looked in detail about how the authority and elected members fulfil and can fulfil in the future the corporate parenting role and responsibility. And as part of that, it was agreed that we will introduce a member champion model to look at the 3 key areas that we are progressing and focusing on for our older children in care and care leavers. So they are around education, training and work. The second one is around health, and the third is around accommodation. So the attached in Appendix A, the draft corporate parenting strategy is out for consultation. We're currently working with our children and young people to gather their views and to make sure that the final strategy will very clearly include their voice and what they say and what they want and what they need from us as corporate parents. And we are with them looking at producing a much shorter child-friendly version that will be able to go to every child and young person in the authority who is in our care or is a care leaver, that will clearly outline what we will do and what they can expect from us as corporate parents.
Thank you. Councillor Sheehan.
Yes, welcome the report and the draft document strategy. I'd like to make an appeal for clarity on this very important point about what is our collective responsibility as corporate parents. And there is something of a philosophical question to be answered here, and that is corporate parenting genuinely a collective responsibility, or is it something we have to interpret and act upon as we see fit as individuals? I think there's some kind of decision needs to be taken as to whether it's one or the other, because if it's going to be a collective responsibility, as it says in the report, I think we need a framework which enables us to act collectively and coordinate our actions as corporate parents. I think just to let it trickle down and say, well, you've got to work this out for yourself is not good enough. So I'd appeal for that particular question to be resolved and resolved in a more collective way.
I'll pick it up, and Sharon may add. I think it's a really good point around the kind of understanding of what being a corporate parent is, and I think the response is probably both a collective responsibility and an individual responsibility we all have. So I don't know whether I'm going to provide you with much clarity. I think if I can just point you to page 40, one of the which is section 7 of the strategy. I think that sets out really clearly the what the role is as counsellors, as corporate parents is, and what you as individual counsellors need to be either aware of or involved in as corporate parents. And I guess some of the expectation around corporate parents is around how we think about, either as individuals looking at opportunities for children, or as a collective group, how you scrutinise those of us that are delivering direct services. So for example, individuals may well, through their own connections, make opportunities available for some of our children and families as corporate parents. But collectively as members, you may well be part of a group like this where you're challenging the delivery and you're being a good corporate parent because you're holding to account. So I'm not sure there is a straight answer around the kind of individual versus collective responsibility, but I think the expectations of county councillors are set out really clearly in those 7 principles that Sharon has described. And I guess some of it is about how you as county councillors champion children and champion the needs of children, either in your communities or through these groups, or certainly kind of on an individual case by case basis. So that I'm not sure there is an easy answer to it, but I guess from a department point of view, we would be more than happy to work with members to help you understand your role more as corporate parents in order to get the best out of you as corporate parents as well.
That I would say you need buy-in, you need us to want to participate in this, and this is why I think there needs to be a framework so that we can all work together on this, not simply look at it as individuals and try and work out what we are supposed to do. I think if you want things to happen, the framework's necessary.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. All I was going to add is that sitting and reporting to this committee is a children in care panel made up of several elected members, and I think that is a really good opportunity for members and members of this panel to actually do some of the holding to account, some of the champion that we've talked about, but also developing with us what that framework could look like.
Your name was down first. Mr. Barton.
Could you expand on the progress about the member champions, please?
I can, and you are one of them.
Correct.
Yeah. Three elected members have been identified, and we're in the process of setting, and the terms of reference for that role have been agreed. We're in the process of setting up a meeting via committee services, member services, to meet with the three members and the service for us to look in more detail at that role.
That's the answer. Thank you.
I'm glad you got that right, Sharon.
Well, I hadn't heard anything, so I was concerned that
they're all doing it without you.
That
I'm sure you will now. Mrs. Lewis.
Thank you, Chair. Personally, as a parent, I've recently deposited my eldest at university, and been confronted with the reality of actually parenting probably most challenging when you're no longer legally responsible for them. And I wondered to what extent we'd captured that sense of our ongoing responsibility, of the council's ongoing responsibility, as actually we're probably no longer legally responsible for them in the same way. And I came across something on Twitter whereby I believe a local authority in the north had persuaded a local university to offer free 52-week accommodation to care leavers. And it struck me, I wonder how kind of those nuggets of detail can inform our strategic thinking about how we support our care leavers more effectively. Thank you.
It's lovely when you can answer a question, isn't it? And that's good news.
That is very much part of the work we're doing around our core offer for care leavers, and we're currently looking at the financial support and package that we provide for those young people up to 25. That includes the support that we currently give those that choose to go to university or on to higher education, and the support that we would want to offer. We do currently provide support for accommodation for young people coming home from university to make sure that they've got a safe and secure place to go to when all their friends at university are going home. But we're currently looking at that financial package in some detail, and we have looked at that offer by some universities in the north, and we are working with the Department of Education. We have their advisor has been into the authority earlier this year and done some work with us about our offer, and he's actually returning later this week to look at some of the progress that we've made.
Mr. Old, would you like to comment on the progress for corporate parenting?
Thank you, Chair. I think the fact that we've had a 5-member panel brings the whole subject of corporate responsibilities for children in care right to the forefront of councillor thinking. I think Sean is right to seek further clarification, because in the 20-odd years that I've been here, I think it's fair to say that the majority of councillors have not known about their responsibilities in terms of the children that we look after. And when under the Labour government, the role I currently occupy was set up in 2005, and the shift away from focusing largely on schools to looking more at social care came into being, there was a long way to go. There are memories that I have that I found totally unacceptable back in 2005. The biggest problem for young people in our care was that when they moved, they didn't even have a suitcase to put their belongings in. They had black plastic bags. Their self-concept was that they were useless, they had very low self-esteem, they thought everybody mocked them, and it was difficult to see what councillors had actually done to change those perceptions. And this is where I would pay credit to the people who were on overview and scrutiny at the time. When I brought issues like this forward, I found across the board, without any attempt at political gain, people began to understand. And I think the fact that you've now had the 5-member panel, and the 5-member panel has come up with the recommendations that it has, is really the best sign I can think of the positive progress that we've made. I meet our young people in care regularly at the Children in Care Junior and Senior Councils, and more occasionally from SIPAC. And the one thing that you find out about them is they suss out people that are not genuine very quickly. They suss out adults who make promises and don't deliver on them very rapidly. They're quite streetwise in that respect. And they know, because we tell them, and our children's rights officers in particular tell them, what their rights are. So the agenda, to a certain extent, I think, has been met. This particular committee, before many of you were on it, actually had a presentation from Children in Care. Incredibly powerful. Young people coming in who might be problems at school, who were able to say, I'm a young adult, this is how it comes to me. And it reminds me of the ACEs video that you saw at the beginning of this meeting. The most powerful part of that was the young person speaking about those adverse childhood experiences, but how other people rationalised it. And only yesterday I was reading through some casework. It was fairly clear that the voice of the young person, that wasn't this authority, it was another authority, was not being listened to. Adults were basically making the decision and expecting everybody to jump with it. We're in a much healthier place than that. If you go to those Children in Care Council meetings, they are really well run. They're run by young people. And if I take the Corporate Parenting Board that I chair, I now chairman, because in the early inception, it was a traditional county council board with a laid out agenda, all done by officers, and now it's co-chaired with a representative from the Children in Care Council and myself. We get a whole group of young people coming along, and the Children's Partnership has followed suit by having young people from the county come and present on issues such as knife crime, for instance. So I think we're in a much healthier place, but when you manage to achieve one goal, that's not the end of the road. There'll always be another goal, and at the end of it you've got to remember that each young person has a unique set of perceptions, and so the way that we think they're going to necessarily evaluate and respond is not necessarily how they will do that, and that underlines the importance of listening to what they have to say and treating them with respect.
Thank you for that. As chair to that 5-member panel, our initial remit, I think, was to how we could increase the awareness of our responsibility as members to being a corporate parent, but it went further on from that. We got all the districts and boroughs to agree to taking away the council tax, and I'm desperately trying to think of how many years. I've forgotten how many years it was. Up to the age of 25, wasn't it? And the councils and all in Leicestershire, the boroughs and the districts have agreed to that. We also highlighted the 3 areas where it would be good to have a champion for that, and I think we've got 2 of the champions here right now, so thank you for that. And also, as we saw on the clip, the ACEs are extremely important, and if we act as a corporate parenting in the right way at the right time, then hopefully we can reverse any damage that was done initially to all these vulnerable youngsters. By all means, they're not all vulnerable. Their beginnings aren't all the same, but the majority of them have seen adverse childhood, had experienced adverse childhood experiences. So I was very pleased to chair the panel and very pleased with its outcome as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. If I just introduce the report. So Nikki Collins, as many of you I hope will know, is our Head of Children in Care and is the operational and strategic lead for our fostering and adoption services. So Nikki will present the report firstly on the fostering agency and then later on the adoption agency.
Thank you, Nikki.
Thank you. So just as a way of a reminder, the local authority has a duty to ensure sufficiency of places for our children in care. And when we talk about sufficiency, we talk about 2 specific areas. One is the more obvious one, that's around the actual placement, that's having the right carer for the young person. The other element is having the right carer and the right care at the right time, which is the harder part to achieve. And that speaks about permanency for children, that when you've got the right placement, the right carer at the right time, you're able to ensure that the child has, because they have a right to family life, that they don't drift in the system, that they get a sense of emotional permanency by being connected to a family, to a community. So Leicestershire has 2 agencies. We deliver 2 agencies, one for fostering and one for adoption. And the fostering agency has got 2 distinct roles. The first is for the recruitment of foster carers, and that quite typically consists of a marketing element and an assessment and approval element. And the other area, which is quite hidden and we quite often don't hear as much about as we should, is the retention element. And the retention element of or function of our fostering agency relates specifically to the support that our foster carers receive, the training that they receive, and the community peer-to-peer support that we promote. So the overview report sets out some of those achievements, of which I just want to highlight a few areas for you that perhaps aren't always the obvious achievements. So you quite often get to hear about recruitment and our recruitment numbers. But in the last year, our fostering agency, in fact, it's taken us 2 years, we went live last year, was to deliver what is called a foster carers portal and the children's memory box. And this is delivered through egress. And this has 2 functions. The first of which means that our foster carers can receive their information. So that might be their reviews, their annual reviews. It could be their payment remittances. A whole range of information no longer goes goes through the mail, the snail mail. It goes securely via the foster carer's portal, and the foster carer can access that information whenever they choose. Not only does this save the local authority thousands, we estimate £50,000 a year in postal fees to our foster carers. Our foster carers then have an automatic way to go look at what we call their foster carer's handbook.
Can I just clarify that?
Yes.
Postal, how much?
£50,000 a year.
Shocking.
That we were spending on postage for foster carers. Yeah. So our foster carers have really appreciated the foster carer portal and what it's meant for them, and the easy access to their procedures and their remittances and other information. But we also at the same time decided to use it for our children. And what our children have told us over many, many years is that they lose bits of information about their lives, especially as the journey is so traumatic. So, for example, when they come into care, they might not be going into their long-term home. They might, if they come in over a weekend, go to an emergency placement, and then on the Monday go to a short-term placement. And then over time, as we've gotten to know them, they might then move on to their long-term foster home, and they might have had respite in between. And what the children tell us when they're older is they can't remember their foster carers' names, they can't remember necessarily the dog that the first foster carer had. So things that our children would remember, because the state our children are in don't have those kinds of memories. And their documents pass on our electronic system, and those don't necessarily include the photographs that the foster carers have taken. They get lost along the way. So what we've set up is a memory box through egress, where each child has their own virtual memory box, just like our children would have. And in that memory box, there are different folders. So it could be for certificates, it could be photographs of paintings that those children have made, special moments, videos, and we're having tremendous success. And what one of the children told Ofsted when they were here is that that their memory box provides continuity where their social workers can't, and when they're moving around. So it was an incredibly impactful piece of work. And why I wanted to choose that to demonstrate that is that the fostering service provides so much more in terms of death. We recently lost a little girl, so Darcy, she was in the papers. Her birth parents worked with us, a little baby who had a congenital disorder. And another piece of work that the fostering agency undertook was to bring all the carers that supported Darcy, and there was a number of them, all the social workers, the hospital staff and the birth family, and we had a walk on the weekend to celebrate Darcy's life. So that's another really good but complex example of how fostering has truly created a family. So the We Are Family approach is owned, and we take that seriously, and that We Are Family is the professionals, our foster carers, our children and our birth families. So I wanted to highlight that because we would have been in quite a dire situation if our projected numbers came true. We projected 3 years ago that we'd lose 20 carers a year due to retirement, their age, moving on. And because of that, we had quite a high target for recruitment of carers. We recognise that the retention strategy will play an absolutely crucial role, and when we came up with the strapline of We Are Family, our carers helped us come up with that to say that is what we'd want to feel and hear if you want us to stay with Leicestershire. And this year we've lost, our estimated number was 20 based on our projections 3 years ago. This year to date we've lost 3. So an incredible achievement. So I can't emphasize enough that our recruitment strategy would be incredibly difficult if we did not having the retention strategy running alongside it. So just in terms of some other numbers, just so that you have an overview, is that we've just recently launched our specialist foster carers recruitment. We had, so that was in beginning of October, and we had 15 carers attend, 5 of whom asked for an initial visit, and of those 4 have now received the initial visit and have entered the progression phase to stage 1. So our specialist carers have our children with the most complex needs who aren't suitable to or aren't yet ready for a traditional family life. They need what it says on the tin, one-to-one wraparound care, no other children at any point in the household. And last year we actually had the Department of Education visit us to understand our success and how we had launched it so that other local authorities could learn from our campaign. So we hope to go from strength to strength. Our one-to-one and pathway carers are an integral way of the way we work, and that we help a lot of children step down from residential, and that we need to continue to invest in that if we want to see children placed in the right placement at the right time and not default to placements like residential care. So that is another crucial element. And then finally, to highlight another hidden success but crucial element is our independent visitor scheme. So when I started working with fostering and with Joss Longman 3 years ago now, our independent visitor numbers were very low, were too low. Independent visitor is a volunteer who we match to a child in care, who over time is their continuity, who will visit them approximately once a month, take them out, befriend them, provide independent advice at some level. And at that time, we had around 20. We now have 38 independent visitors and are receiving more and more inquiries from other local authorities about how we've managed to achieve that. And we have a target over the next 2 years to increase that to 70. So another incredible success that sits within our retention part of our strategy. That means that foster carers and children and their placements are supported and remain stable. So any questions before I move on to adoption?
70, that's quite ambitious. What is the likelihood of you being able to get to that?
We're applying the same model to our independent visitor recruitment as we have to our foster carers, in that we are offering a retention package. So what makes us slightly different to other local authorities is that we offer bespoke training. We have a dedicated independent visitor coordinator whose duty is not only to do that recruitment but to offer that training and those support groups to our carers and to arrange peer support. So it is an ambitious target, and I'd rather fall short of an ambitious target than set our targets too low, because 70 is the number we need to be able to make sure that children who need independent visitors have them.
Thank you. And just about 18 months ago, probably 2 years, I came and had a meeting with you, Nikki, and you told me about the memory box. It's such a simple idea, and it's something very basic. I mean, my teenage, no, they're not teenagers anymore, who am I kidding? My 20 to 30-year-old children, when they come round and spend any time, out come the albums, and they look through them. And fortunately, all my photographs have something written on the back of where it was, when it was, and that is very important. Yet my children's got it all on a disc, not written on, nothing like that. So in years to come, they're not going to have the memories that say my albums provide them. So, as I say, it's such a simple thing. And does that still happen for adoption as well?
Adoption is slightly different, so they will have, any child who's been in our care will have a memory box, a virtual memory box, and that at a certain times in their life we will write to them to remind them what their login details, their access details are, and they can access. But when when a child is adopted, that responsibility for their memory box will fall to their adopters to carry on that journey. So to create that, it will no longer be on our electronic system that they can upload that information. But our adopters receive bespoke training on life story work, and we also this year, and again we were complimented. It's a unique feature. Ofsted identified that we have a dedicated life story worker for adoption, that prior to them going to adoption will convene a meeting with people who've been involved in that child's life to collect positive memories. So that includes birth families, professionals, the adopters, foster carers, to make sure that at the point of handing over to the adopters, the best possible collection of memories is available for that child.
I'm thinking really of those that are in later years and they try to trace their birth family, and you know, it's purely up to their adopters to provide that, and if they haven't, then that memory is lost. But there you go. Right, Councillor Welsh, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the report, Nikki. It was interesting read again, as always. I want to ask 3 questions about specialist one-to-one level 6 foster carers. You gave us the good news about the recruitment, but where are we in overall numbers now?
We currently have three one-to-one carers, and we have 2 pathway carers. So we had 2 pathway carers approved last year in November, and we currently still have 2 pathway carers. The beauty about pathway carers is that they're not restricted to having only 1 child. They can have more than 1 child. So we have 2 pathway carers with 3 children in placements. I can't remember what that saying is about being hoisted by your own petard. Is that right? I've got that English saying right? Well, our success speaks for ourselves, because our one-to-one carers are meant to be time, and our pathway carers are meant to be time-limited placements. We had such a success with our pathway carer last year, with a young person stepping down from residential, in that we are now looking at an SGO, permanence in our pathway carer's care, so we'll no longer be involved. And he's officially changed his name. So he's been there since November. He's officially changed his name to that carer's name. He feels part of that family. He doesn't want to leave in any way. They don't want him to leave. So our success for our pathway carer is that although we have 2, we're likely to have 1 very soon, but it's a success because that child is going to be there till they're 18 and will have a family for their adulthood. So it's a moving game, and it's a moving beast all the time. But we have got 4 in assessment, and our target was 2 for the year growth. So I'm hoping by the end of the year we might have lost 1 but gained 3 or 4. So we will still be meeting our targets.
The second question, Nikki, is you quite rightly said that one of the benefits of these type of specialist carers is that hopefully we can reduce the number of children that go into residential care. Is it feasible, however ambitious it sounds, that we could actually put all children that currently are in residential or out-of-county placements into such specialist foster carers accommodation?
Simple answer is no. The complex answer is they have such a range of complex behaviours and scary behaviours. For many foster carers in many family environments, it would be very scary behaviours. What we also know is that caring for children with such high needs, some of them have got physical disabilities as well, and caring for children with such high needs is exhausting, and that and why those residential homes can meet their needs is that there's a changeover of staff quite rapidly. So the staff that have been on can go and get a rest, and in a normal traditional family environment, that's not possible. So the simple answer is we will always have a need for residential care for some children.
And my last one is much shorter, I suspect. What did Ofsted have to say about our fostering service?
Well, I think if they could get a rating of their own in the Ofsted report, the rating would have been outstanding. And reflected what I've said here today. They are ambitious, they are creative, they work tirelessly, and that our foster carers, they said very specifically, our foster carers provide good care for our children and know our children very well.
Mrs. Page.
Thank you, Chairman. Capital big 75-page developments for 2019-20. First bullet point, to develop a scheme further, we need to recruit a full-time post holders. 75 has this process been completed and has this post been filled? And another question, which is slightly controversial, I have been recently watching some television program where children who were fostered were placed in an unsuitable accommodation, i.e. holiday caravans, boats and whatever. How do we ensure that this doesn't happen in our authority? Thank you.
So in relation to the post holder for independent visitors, the 0.5, we're in the process of recruiting. This is another success story that has consequences. Our independent visitor coordinator has had a very long career in management, in social care, and came to us as a independent visitor coordinator. We quickly convinced her to step back up into management for Leicestershire, and is now one of our fostering panel advisors, and which means that we've now got a vacancy again in that independent visitor post. So as we identify talent, we very quickly reap that and make the best of that. So we are in recruitment for that post for independent visitor coordinator. Second question, are you happy for me to progress?
I will repeat it. Recently, in the news, there have been reports in regard to foster children being placed in unsuitable accommodations, i.e. holiday caravans, boats, and, well, just unsuitable accommodation. How do we ensure that this doesn't happen?
Thank you, Nikki. Thank you. We do have children in holiday activity camps, and we monitor those very carefully. So we have children who, and we have one recently who had a very difficult time in a residential home, and because of that he seriously assaulted a member of their staff. And what we identified is a place for him where we can reduce the kind of pressure that was on him even in a children's home around the structure. So we have commissioned a week away for him where he's doing other activities. Now that is what's called an unregulated placement, and that gives him a time to diffuse, a time for the social worker to go out and spend time with him to understand what happened, and for us to go then and commission the appropriate placement for him. If we had put that referral out to the market as it was at that point, to say we have a young person who assaulted a member of staff in the residential home, and essentially that residential home didn't want them anymore, we wouldn't find a suitable placement for him. So we use that week to diffuse the situation, to go out to do our assessment, to understand what happens, and then to write the referral to market to say, this is what we understand what happened, this is his reaction to it, this is how we've managed it, this is the support we will offer, and this is the kind of home we are looking for him. So we do use those, but in Leicestershire we manage those very well and very closely, and they're time limited.
If I can just add, they are time limited. They're for a very small group of young people. We've probably only used them for 2 or 3 young people during the whole of the 12 months, and they are commissioned appropriately via our placement team. So these are organisations, childcare organisations that run those activities.
Hi. This report's nearly as successful as your rugby team. Could you just clarify you've got this table. I've been fiddling around with this while you've been talking, and now I've lost it. You've got a table, which here we are, page 8. It's underneath the 2 pictures, foster events 1819. What does attended and requested for in Roman numerals mean? And then there's 12-2-24 7-8. Sorry, to apologise. Yeah, 58. Yes. Amongst other things. Yes.
I think the honest answer is I can't recall, but I can find out for you.
Yeah.
I'll speak to Joss. Yeah.
Okay. And looking at the figures, just while you're talking, looking at the figures about the number of people that were assessed, the number of people that became foster carers. Again, for clarification, is this number, bear in mind I've not seen one of these reports before because I'm new to this committee, what is this new people this year, or is this total number of people who are in the system fostering? And so, because it would be interesting to know how many foster carers there are in Leicestershire live now, how many children there are in foster care live now, please. Of course, that question can then link to the next agenda item, actually on adoption.
Okay. Yeah, we haven't yet covered the report, but we can do, yeah. So we have 133 foster carer households that are, for lack of a better word, our mainstream foster carers, and that provides us with 191 beds or placements in Leicestershire. In addition to that, we have 70 family and friends, so connected foster carers. So a connected foster carer is a carer or a person that has come forward or we've approached when a child has entered care or had to change placement. It could be a family member, a granny, a grandpa, an auntie, or it could be somebody who knows that child from within the community. So we have teachers who are connected carers, we have nursery school providers, a carer who are connected foster carers, who we then assess specifically for that child to be a foster carer. So we have 120 children in those placements, in 70 placements. And then in addition to that, we have 180 children who are placed in external fostering agency placements.
Do you mean homes?
No, foster homes.
Out of the county?
No, many of those are in the county.
Oh.
But they're just external, as in they're not our own. We've commissioned them from the market.
Councillor Parton maybe isn't aware that we have our own service at the County Council, but there are independent foster agencies as well.
If I can just add, Chair, the table at the bottom of page 8, the attended are the people that have attended our information events and evenings to find out more about being foster carers, and the number at the running along the bottom are those that of those, how many requested an initial visit to follow up on fostering.
Thank you, Nikki.
So Leicestershire also has an adoption agency, and that adoption agency has got 3 primary functions. The first is for the recruitment and assessment of adopters, but also the support of those adopters through that assessment process and those early stages when a child is placed with them. The second function is family finding. So the adoption team play quite a significant role in taking the profile of the child and their needs and the profile of the carer, prospective carers, and making a match to make sure that as far as possible we are confident that those carers or those future parents can meet the needs of those children. And then we also are responsible for the ongoing support to that child up until the 3rd year after their order, but also therapeutic support through their life. So those are through their childhood. So those are the main functions of our fostering agency. I just wanted to pull out some key areas again that I think are particular strengths and good news stories. I don't know any of you are Yammer fans, but I use Yammer a lot and post a lot of our good news stories on Yammer. That's our own social media site that Leicestershire County Council has. So I post a lot of the good news stories where we get permission from families to do so on our Yammer site. And one of those comes through our birth records counselling provision. Birth records counselling is as an adult, our adopted children or young people, adults then, adopted families can come back and can request information about their birth families. So we might do a birth and records check. We will guide them through their file and go through their file and support them with that counselling. And then we will also support reunification where both parties would like that. And this year we unified 3 brothers who had been placed or moved all to different continents, living in different continents across the world. And the 2 brothers travelled to England to meet his brother, and we facilitated a high tea for their reunion. So I just wanted to give you a sense of the kind of work that we do that's not the obvious work of adoption teams, and that family has provided us with the most incredible feedback, those 3 brothers, about what that meant with them and how we stood with them and supported them through that journey. And there are many other families who come back later on for our support in for birth records counselling. I also want to highlight that most local authorities have a wait list of months and possibly years for birth records counselling. Our families that return to us receive an immediate visit, and we have no waiting time. So an incredible achievement in times where money is hard and resources are precious. We currently have last year we recruited 34 households, so new adopters, but I wanted to draw your attention to how strong our pipeline is, in that we have over 60 adopters in assessment at the moment, most of which we think will be approved by March next year. So we should have a further 60 families available to children for our new financial year, which is the most amazing achievement. The team's target for last year was 40. They just missed that. For this year it's 50, and they'll exceed that assessment target. So incredibly proud of them. I also want to highlight a change in practice in that we are cooperating across the region to match children to the best possible families rather than just from within our pool. And because of that, we made 12 placements across the region where we felt our assessed adopters weren't the best match for our children, which means we paid for adopters from other local authorities, and that exchange of adopters to make sure we are making the best possible match for children is going from strength to strength across the region. And will carry on doing so. Leicestershire hosts that monthly family finding meeting for Lincolnshire, Leicestershire, Leicester City and Rutland. On a sadder note, I want to, and I know this has been an area of focus in at previous overview on scrutinies, we've had one disruption, and a disruption is when the adoption order, the final order, hasn't gone through, but the child returns to our care before that order is made, and in that circumstance it was very specifically around a change in the family's circumstances that couldn't be avoided, and that child has returned to our care. I do want to highlight, though, we are being, if you see elsewhere in the report, we are being incredibly ambitious about, where it's right to do so, placing older children and children with quite significant physical disabilities in adoptive homes. We have been quite successful in the last year, but in doing so, there's a higher risk of disruption and a higher need for support, which adds additional strain on our teams. So where we have success, we also need to redirect our resources to make sure the most vulnerable adoptive families receive the support that they require. And then finally, I just want to highlight that we ran a pilot in the last year, a permanence pilot. We created a new team based on our research, so regional adoption. We learned that the most successful adoption agencies, local authority adoption agencies, have what is called a permanence team. And that permanence team does a lot of the work that used to traditionally sit with our child protection teams around describing that child, profiling that child, so writing their story, their difficulties, their strengths, and then that report is used for matching. Well, that service transferred to my service this year, so to the adoption team from locality. And what we didn't expect is that we heard from other local authorities, but we didn't expect the success, is that the other local authorities who did this said you will have a much better take-up from birth families needing support and being able to work with them, because that support isn't being offered at the front door from it, doesn't appear to be in the locality with a social worker who has removed the child, which is incredibly difficult then for birth parents to ask for support. And in the pilot, where we worked with 7 children to prepare the reports for permanence, 6 birth families accepted support from our adoption team and continued to work with our adoption team, 6 out of 7. And we asked them what they wanted and how they wanted that support to look. And they said they would like peer-to-peer support facilitated by us on a monthly basis. So we now offer a support group called First Family for our birth families of adopted children. That will carry on running, so we found a way to deliver it, but we found the way, and I suppose this is where you're asking your corporate parenting responsibility. We found a way to do it because we are being sponsored by a nightclub, which I will not name, in Leicester, who is providing us with our facilities during the day when they otherwise would have been closed. So an incredible corporate parenting response from a nightclub. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Councillor Old.
Not a lot to say, Chair. I think the report speaks for itself. If I had to ask a question, which I will be doing in due course, we all know that Coram have closed in Shepshed, and I think that could have an impact in the adoption work that we do, but I need to tease that out subsequent to this meeting. I just think where Nikki is taking both fostering and adoption, it's been very good. I was the person who regionally refused to go down this route of a regional adoption agency, had a meeting with the chair of the national board, who to this day has not answered the questions that I put to him, which were quite simple. Fostering and adoption are intertwined and interlinked. If you split them, what is going to be the impact on fostering? No answer. Safeguarding is crucial. Is it going to be damaged in any way? No answer. Nikki and her colleagues have got to the stage now we're working with the city and with Lincolnshire. We've got our own route, and it's obviously showing benefits in terms of placing young people in a wider geographic area than we would normally have access to. So in that sense, I'm quite comfortable, but I would still, although I won't be around to get the answers, I would still like to hear the people in London give me an explanation to the questions that I put to them when Paul Meredith was our interim director several years ago. But a really good report.
Excellent report. Excellent delivery. No, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. So this report is one of a number of complaints reports with a specific focus on complaints accepted and responded to under the statutory children's social care procedure during 2018-19. The details set out within the report, so I'll just take you through some of the key messages and highlights from the year. To start with, looking at the volume of complaints, like the previous year, there was a fairly sharp rise in complaints during the year, rising to 134 at stage 1. So that equates to a 45% rise and mirrors the previous year increase from the previous year. I guess one of the pitfalls of looking at annual reports is, by their very nature, they're quite backward looking. So I think it's probably helpful just to bring members up to speed with the position through the first 2 quarters of this year and where that trend's looking, because it was on a fairly upward trajectory. It's actually eased off during that time, and on year to date is looking at reducing back to the sort of levels seen in 2017. So at the halfway point of the year, there were 47 complaints received at stage 1. So it's on track for a reduction this year. And that kind of mirrors that the kind of peak were in the second 2 quarters of the year, and thereafter started to see a drop-off for reasons which I'll go into as some of the learning and outcomes that have been implemented through that time. It's also important to obviously look at complaints in the round as well, and I always say numbers are just one indicator. It's actually more important what we're doing with those complaints and how we're drawing that intelligence, and sometimes those volumes are actually improvements in terms of accessibility, referring in complaints around that. Despite the increase at volume 1, it's also reassuring to note that we've largely controlled the escalations into those stage 2 and stage 3 processes, the more expensive and in-depth independent stages of the process. So 9 requests out of the 134 sought escalation in that last year to stage 2, and that equates to about 6% of the overall volume, and is actually the lowest proportion escalating for 5 years. And that's encouraging and shows the results of, I guess, work with the department and a much greater emphasis on that local resolution, grasping those issues early on, particularly the importance of personal contact early with complainants, which is definitely more prevalent in the last year and continues through this year, and is helping with some of those early resolutions there. In terms of what's being complained about, the largest category is still around decision making in its widest sense, and often that is about the quality of and clarity of decisions being made. So whether it be the quality of assessments, whether it be the clarity in information going back to parents, which it normally is around the rationale for actions being taken or what needs to happen, anything along those lines. So that's still an area that we can improve, and I know there is work going on around strengthening quality of assessments, the quality and consistency of case recording is another area that comes into play there. So all of those are some of the areas that is still there is signs of improvement, but we've still got a way to go on those sort of areas. The other area, the other kind of theme coming through this year that was probably a change from the previous year was more around delay, and again in its widest sense, which is often about lack of communication and coming back to people. Primarily, that's driven by capacity issues within some of the areas, and I know in particular one locality was more affected than the others around that, and there is an action plan in place to address those, which we're starting to see the positive results from. In terms of response timescales to complaints, we resolved 77% at stage 2 within the 20 working days threshold which we're given, and that's identical performance to last year. Whilst there are undoubtedly some of the complaints that obviously have challenges in terms of the subject matter and things, that there's still room for improvement there, and that's an area to still target. Importantly, whilst it's a delicate balance between. There's lots of examples where meetings have been offered and that and managers have sought to engage with parents and keep it focused on resolution. The balance is between letting that drift too long at that stage and then being seen to prevent rights of escalation. So that's the delicate balance there. That's not always easy to get right. We've also made improvements this year to some of the response times at stage 2 and 3 of the process. We received criticism during the year from the local government ombudsman around overall timescales for handling a complaint, and that led to some greater clarity in terms of the stage 1 escalation pathway and workflows for my officers, which is bearing dividends. It also prompted a review of some of the resource pool that we use at independent investigations, and we now generally use a more managed service, which just means which we get much more responsive timescales to, and benefit from independent quality assurance of those complaints in a way that we perhaps didn't have before. So that's another positive through the year. This report also, to bring balance, looks at compliments recorded. And there's been a further increase through the year of those, rising quite significantly up to 49 that we recorded. And these are all unsolicited compliments that come to me. Significant among those is a lot of compliments around the foster care from foster carers, which perhaps mirrors the previous report around fostering. It's an area that's seen as really valued, the support to foster carers, and that comes through in some of the compliments that we see. I've included within the report across pages 122 to 125 are a number of case studies which are a really good way of kind of articulating some of the learning from complaints this year. And there's some good examples through the year of where we've used the complaints intelligence to drive service improvements. And really I've picked up ones that are more than resolving individual cases of where those should be benefits to many. So within there, that includes a review of how the OT section works with our colleagues in the district councils around in connection with DFG grants, which has been a bit clunky and cumbersome and quite confusing, if I'm honest, to people going through that process. So we've to put some steps in to improve how the collaborative work and indeed the complaints handling in that area works.
DFG grants.
Disabled facility grants. Sorry, Chair. Other examples around, and again we've heard previously around the move around the post-adoption support work, moving from out of locality to an adoptions, and Nikki spoke very well around how that's improved things, and again that's come out of this year's work, along with strengthening our case management oversight in cases. That's probably an area where we've still got a bit of way to go. There's clear examples in a number of areas where that's working much better. Consistency is the key there, I think, is probably the watchword I'd say on there. We're not yet totally consistent in that area. Just looking at any decisions that the Ombudsman made in the year, they considered 8 complaints during the year around children's social care services, and made 2 adverse decisions from those 8, with one financial assessment of £500. The details of those cases are within the papers. Those remain fairly low levels of finding a fault with the Ombudsman, and compares quite well with other authorities, so and gives good reassurance that for the most part complaints are being resolved appropriately through the 3 stages of local resolution. I think those were the key messages that I wanted to bring from today's report, but welcome any questions.
I don't suppose mine's a question really. It's just a it's just that on here has been brought up poor recording, and that has been consistently all the way through what we've been presented with today, all of the reports except the fostering and adopting. I'll take those out. Yeah, Nikki's gone. And I just hope that enough work is going to be done on that. I mean, some of the complaints probably wouldn't have been upheld if the recording had been up to scratch. I don't know how the recording's done here, but I know that if I rang up, which I did, Virgin the other day, and then I had to ring back, they noticed that I'd already rang and it was all down on a computer screen. I'm assuming you do that. It's all computerised. I'm assuming, is it?
Yes, Chair. It's all contained on electronic records. What we are doing is looking at those records, because currently some of the things that we need to record are attachments to the records, and obviously wherever there's an attachment to be made, it can weaken the process, whereas if everything flows with the electronic records, then it's clearer for people not to miss out a stage or not to miss out some information. So we have been working for some time to make sure that our Mosaic system supports the practice that we want to give, rather than us trying to work around a system, and we are in development with that.